immigration crime, anti-white sentiment, anti-LGBTQ plus paranoia, residential school unmarked graves, inflation, the housing crisis. Canada is on the brink of chaos. And, of course, Canada is becoming a communist hellhole under Justin Trudeau.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Looney, another committee video. This time we have the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, whatever that is. This is Alexandra Chetri, and she's a witness that does stand out. And the Liberals and Conservatives seem to be on the same side of this issue. This is Russian misinformation from a Ukrainian perspective, and questions being asked by MP James BEZAN and MP Jennifer O'Connell, smelly cat. So we're going to take a look at this. It is very interesting to see how we're being infiltrated by the Russians. Let's check this out. Interesting witness. Conservatives and Liberals kind of on the same side on this one. And we get to see Smelly Cat. Let's check that out.
I now invite Ms. Hachi to give an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. The Ukrainian Canadian community has been the target of Soviet and now Russian disinformation for many decades. What many Canadians have difficulty understanding that this is not a case of homeland against diaspora. Our Ukrainian government is not targeting us. It's a foreign government, the Russian government, that has made us the object of their disinformation. And as my friends have alluded, CSIS has identified Russia as a foreign actor and player in disinformation. To quote from their report, Russia also continues to attempt to discredit Canada's Ukrainian community, falsely claiming that it is composed of neo-fascists who control Canada's foreign policy. And there's more that they say, but I'm sure you've read the report. So when our intelligence service comes to these conclusions, why is Canada still a safe haven for Russian operatives? One of the reasons is that some Canadian politicians, foreign policy advisors, and staff in global affairs hold a naive view of Russia and the threat that it poses to Canada and our democratic institutions. For over a decade, our community advocated for the ban on RT, Russia television, but that didn't happen until a full year after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. RT was finally sanctioned by Canada, along with other Russian institutions, such as Putin's think tank, the Valdai Club. But no action has been taken by the government with regard to those in Canada who collaborate with these institutions. There are many Canadian contributors to RT who are allowed to operate with impunity. Indeed, some of them are invited to appear before Canadian parliamentary committees. Others are given grants from Canadian taxpayer money to produce Russian propaganda films. We also know that Canada is a preferred destination for Russian sleeper agents because there doesn't appear to be any detection or prevention of foreign espionage in Canada. They come here because we make it easy for them to establish their identities, all the while carrying on their spycraft. They then move to other allied countries, posing as citizens of a reliable allied partner. They're now Canadians. You know the story of the Vavilov family and, of course, Mikhail Mitushkin, who was recently exchanged in the Evan Gershkowitz exchange. He was a colonel in Russian military intelligence, a valued asset of Putin's. So Russia co-opts authoritative, influential, and persuasive individuals, academics, journalists, social media influencers, who Stalin called useful idiots to repeat and amplify their narratives. And when these narratives are word for word what the Russian embassy and Putin are saying, why does no one ask why? We know that we're here to discuss the RT-run Tenet or doppelganger operation involving a Canadian company owned by two Canadians using Canadian social influencers. They produce Canadian-themed videos on hot-button divisive issues And once they have the ear of a frightened and disaffected audience, they blame the economy and everything else that is wrong in the world on Canadian support for Ukraine, who are all Nazis, by the way. So the government has failed to do anything, and this creates a culture of impunity which normalizes this behavior of referring to Ukrainians as Nazis. And this has also posed a threat to our community, unfortunately. We surveyed our community, and we saw a substantial increase in the number of anti-Ukrainian hate-motivated incidents. We have asked 2 successive ministers of public safety to speak out and condemn this behavior, but they remain silent. We know that for decades, the Soviet Union engaged in active measures, operations to discredit our post-World War II diaspora, who were very critical of the Soviet regime, and we posed a threat to them. One of these operations, unfortunately, was the Deschênes Commission. Evidence in Operation Payback shows that the campaign to inflame the Canadian public by falsely claiming that the infamous Dr. Mengele was hiding in Canada. This was a campaign that was started by a Canadian representative of the Simon Wiesenthal, Saul Littman, who deliberately planted false stories. And once the Canadian public was sufficiently inflamed, the Mulroney government convened a commission of inquiry, which cleared all but 29 individuals. And yet today, we hear repeated calls for the disclosure of the names of these innocent people. Over 800 of them who have several generations of descendants.
I'm sorry, could I get you to wrap up?
Yes. So we also would like to speak to the Russian propaganda film, Russians at War, which was produced by a former producer of Russian television, an example of the kind of naivete that we have in Canada, which not only condones but finances the whitewashing of genocide. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the witnesses for being here and for making this important study. Oh, so they automatically turned it on. So I just wanted to start off by, let's drill down a little bit on the Canadian Media Fund. $340,000 taxpayer money went to Anastasia Trofimov. And anyway, she, as you mentioned, was a former employee of RT, Russian Television Today. Do you believe that the government of Canada should recoup those funds for funding Russian misinformation?
Absolutely. I think it's... Sorry, I don't know if that was directed to
Yeah,
me.
both witnesses.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I'll start then.
If you can start.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's scandalous that Canadian taxpayer money funded this production, and we call for a full investigation as to what she said on her application. Did she disclose that she worked for RT? Because of course RT has scrubbed any reference to her from their website. They understand that that's a liability now. But we need to understand whether the Canadian funding agencies knew that she was a former employee. She produced 11 films for them. Whether they knew that she was entering sovereign Ukrainian territory with an invading army that is committing war crimes. So these are questions that need to be asked, and I think the funding should be refunded, because I am sure that the Kremlin is just giggling at how clever they were in tricking Canadians.
Are there witness any comment on that propaganda film?
Thank you. So the RCDA opposes any film that minimizes or hides the atrocities committed by the Russian government or the Russian army in its invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, we do believe that there's a place for honest journalism and documentary films from the conflict. The RCDA doesn't have information. We have not seen this film, but if the investigation shows that this film was organized under false pretenses on its application and was made with the knowledge and approval of the Russian government, then we do support further action.
So wouldn't we just assume, though, if there's a journalist or a media, or in this case, a director embedded with the Russian troops, that they're there with the blessing of the Kremlin?
I can speak to that. Absolutely. It is inconceivable that Russian military intelligence did not know that this woman spent 7 months embedded in occupied territory. It just...
What's the role of the Canadian government then, other than getting back our taxpayer dollars? What role do they have in seeing whether or not that she actually filmed, maybe has footage of war crimes being committed, which of course are all glossed over in the propaganda film, and what international rules did she, or laws that she essentially broke that the government has not yet taken any action on?
So we know she violated Ukrainian law by entering into occupied territory without the permission of Ukrainian authorities. There is the possibility of violation of sanctions, and the RCMP would be well served to investigate the circumstances around her filming of this documentary. And of course, the RCMP is collecting evidence of war crimes and should seize her footage. She claims she saw no evidence of war crimes, but in 7 months, we know that every single territory that is liberated from Russian occupation, we find evidence of war crimes. We know that they are torturing and executing Ukrainian prisoners of war. So it's inconceivable that in the 7 months she saw nothing.
Okay, you said that you've had a couple of meetings with the former and the current Minister of Public Safety about Russian disinformation, and you are not satisfied with the response that you've received to date from either, I'm assuming it was Minister Blair and his predecessor?
No, I should clarify, it was with Minister Mendicino.
Okay.
He did not take up our request to make a public statement, and we have not been able to secure a meeting with Minister LeBlanc.
Okay. So won't even meet with you on this important issue and how we deal with disinformation. So another cover-up in the works here. Can we, you mentioned other activities of the Russian Federation and going back to Soviet times. Do you believe that journalism in this country is outside of social media, which we know that they've really penetrated in, and RT, of course, and other propaganda tools that they've used, but are any of our mainstream media, do you believe, has been compromised by either the Soviets or the Kremlin today?
Well, I think if you look at the reporting, it is very often word for word what is coming out of the Kremlin and out of the Russian embassy. So I'll say to you, Mr. Bezan, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's not a chicken.
How much? 12? So just in closing, are you aware of any evidence of any journalists today that, or academics that are been compromised because of ties back to the Kremlin?
We know that at the University of Ottawa, there is a regular contributor to Russia television, and we know that at the University of Carleton, there is a prominent member of the Valdai Club, which is Putin's think tank.
Thank you, Mr. Bezan. We go now to Ms. O'Connell. Ms. O'Connell, please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad to see my Conservative colleagues take this study so seriously, and I sincerely hope that there isn't an attempt to shut it down or limit it, as our first witnesses have already highlighted pretty significant areas of concerns. And I think it's imperative that this committee do this work. And so I'd be quite disappointed after that line of questioning to see any sort of limitations of looking into this study coming from Conservatives, or any attempts to not continue with this study when this is our first day. So I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see if there's action behind the words we just heard. Moving to my questions, I found, and this is going to be directed at both organizations, as a local MP, I could honestly feel a shift and a difference in the narrative around the public perception with the invasion in Ukraine. I remember early days attending vigils in my community in Uxbridge with a large Ukrainian population as an example, and how quickly on social media that support for Ukraine started to erode. Even in our first debates of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, it was pretty non-eventful. There seemed to be all-party support. And then you start to see things shift. And a large part of that was changes in narrative online, on social media accounts. And so when this came forward in regards to influencers being potentially and allegedly paid by Russia to look and mimic like Canadian organizations or Canadian social media pages, you start to put two and two together, as I could very clearly see that shift as just a local MP with Ukrainians in my riding as one example. But overall, hearing people start to defend Russia or seeing Russian flags on the Hill and protests to anything, really. So my first question is, and I'll like both of your perspectives on this, do you really believe that influencer accounts that were being funded or allegedly being funded by Russia, do you really believe that they didn't know who was paying? Or is there a world in which people wouldn't know that Russia is sending propaganda? And the comment about if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and if you're repeating Russian propaganda and then to claim you had no idea you were being paid by or repeating Russian propaganda. Have you seen other examples where, this claim that they had no idea who was footing the bill? So maybe I'll start here, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I would say that even though these right now are still allegations, personally, even a cursory search would show that these perspectives are coming from the Russian government. Many times they're, if not word for word, their idea for idea, the idea is coming from the Kremlin, propagated in Russian government propaganda channels. And just addressing something said earlier, I agree with Mr. Shechi that our CDA is dissatisfied with the Canadian government response to the disinformation that we have seen permeating Canadian social media, but also in regards to enforcement of the measures that have been enacted, including sanctions. We have questions as to how these sanctions are enforced, why violations of sanctions seem to be, these investigations seem to be coming from the United States, not from within Canada. Even if a lot of the disinformation seems to be happening in the United States, due to the interconnectedness of the Canadian and American ecosystems, narratives that originate there, permeate, eventually end up in Canada and affect the national discourse here.
If I may add, just as to your prior comments about the changing narrative among your constituents, this is actually something that's increasingly backed by data. There are some interesting analysis, including from Marcus Kolga, that shows that there are more and more Canadians that are exposed to the Kremlin narrative online, and that these narratives are having an impact on how Canadians think about the Ukraine war, for instance. And this is not only a Ukraine war issue, it's also an issue that targets broader issues in Canadian politics, such as the housing crisis, the inflation, and even the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And that has been something that the Kremlin has done in Canada for close to a decade, as my friend alluded to in his testimony.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I am just limited on time, and I'd like to get, but just, do you think it's also problematic when politicians are being paid to fly to, around the world by institutions like the Danube Institute, who has been known to also promote anti-Ukraine and more so Kremlin propaganda? Do you think it's problematic if Canadian politicians are also being paid for institutes that share that? And maybe I'll start here since I know I'm limited on time.
Absolutely, because there is the possibility and the appearance of bias, and so I think that all trips paid by other entities should be banned for Canadian politicians. But I beg to differ with my friend. I believe that there was a Canadian social media influencer who was working for Tenet, Lauren Southern, and she did produce videos on immigration crime, anti-white sentiment, anti-LGBTQ plus paranoia, residential school unmarked graves, inflation, the housing crisis. Canada is on the brink of chaos. And of course, Canada is becoming a communist hellhole under Justin Trudeau. So these are not just American-directed narratives. Canada was directly targeted.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up quickly.
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not too sure what to think. Have the Russians invaded Canada? Let me know what you think in the comments. My name is Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. We watch all the committee videos. We watch a daily broadcast of the question period. You're invited to come and join us for that. Our live show is fun. Great chat room. Come check it out. My name's Aaron, Canadian Looney. Like, subscribe, share, get notified. All those fun things for the live shows, especially get notified. And that is it. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Smelly cat, smelly cat. Catch you next time.